Crinacle's new Zero Bluetooth has got a little bit of a problem, but there's two possible ways that you can solve it that are included in the box. Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan, this is Super Review, and this is the new Truthear Cross Crinacle Zero Bluetooth. As the name suggests, this is a follow-up to the original Zero, which actually came out about 2.5 years ago at this point. And it was the IM that really kicked off this whole double dynamic driver craze, where you've got one dynamic driver just completely dedicated to being a subwoofer. And in that original implementation, the original Zero Blue, it was basically going for the Harman target, and it kind of hit the Harman target better than any other sub $100 IM had at the point. But technology has moved on, things have improved, and hence we've now got the Zero Blue 2. Now the price is up a little bit on this one, up from around 50 bucks for the original. Now we're up to like 65 bucks, but there's a couple of things included in the box that maybe explain that a little bit. But also, my understanding is that they've kind of employed some technologies that they developed with the Zero Red, now have been upgraded into this, but we're still going for a Harman target. So how does it all work together? Well, that's what we're here to talk about. And I guess before we do, a quick shout out to Shenzhen Audio for sending in the Zero Blue 2 for review. If you want to check this IM out, I've got it linked in the description down below. But with that out of the way, let's go to the table. We'll talk about what comes inside the box. We'll talk about the physical form factor, fit, comfort. There are a couple changes there. And then we'll get into talking about the sound, kind of one of the problems that I have with the sound, as well as, again, like I mentioned, a couple of ways that you can solve it before I bring in a couple of other IMs for comparison, and then we'll wrap this review up with a score. So, all right, here's the packaging. It is nice, simple. You've got your waifu, of course. And they include it also on a little postcard, which I guess that's kind of a cool touch. I've been saying this for a while. I don't say it loudly enough, but I think that there should be more like fanfare stuff like this that is included in IMs, right? Give us stickers, give us pins, give us, I guess, postcards. I don't know if a postcard, I'd rather have a sticker, but yeah, they're trying, they're giving us something. Okay, apart from that, well, you get the IM itself. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Of course, you get this little card with a bunch of different ear tips, and it's actually nice that they include quite a few different ear tips. So you've got your standard silicone ear tips in small, medium, and large, as well as you've got a plethora of foam ear tips. And what's interesting is that they do have 2 different sizes, but they've got 4 different pairs. So there's 3 pairs of these medium-sized foam ear tips, and there might be a reason for that. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Apart from that, you do get the same little carry case that was included with a couple of other Truthear IMs. You know, it's soft. It's not going to have a lot of like impact protection for your IMs, but you know, I like that it's compact and actually pocketable. So I like that. And then there is this new addition. This was not included with the original Zero, but there was a version of this included with the Zero Red. So now here with the Blue 2, you've got a 5 ohm impedance adapter. And this is basically, this connects to the end of the cable here, and it adds impedance to the cable. Now, what does that do? It changes the sound signature. How does it do it? We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. But I think what's probably the most notable aspect of this is the fact that it's a 5 ohm impedance adapter. That is super, super low. I've seen a lot of these impedance adapters. I own a number of them that are usually ranging between like 30 to 100 ohms of impedance. Having a 5 ohm impedance adapter, this is actually pretty useful, and frankly, it's pretty rare. So that's actually kind of a cool reason to potentially pick up this IM. But apart from that, let me move this stuff to the side, bring in the IM, and let's talk about the physical form factor on the IM itself, starting with the cable. Now, this is actually probably the first area where I'm going to say that there's a nice improvement here in the build quality of the Zero Blue 2. The original Zero, it came on, here I'll pull it in just for context, it came on this original Truthear cable, which is just a little bit thin and a little bit tangly. But they've upgraded it to this cable, which is a lot like the cable you get with the Truthear Gate. And this is actually one of my favorite IM cables ever. I know that seems silly coming on an IM that only costs 55 bucks, and in the Gates case, it's only like a $20 IM, but this really is just a fantastic cable. It's got like a nice weight to it. It's not too heavyweight, not too thin and tangly. It's got pretty nice behavior on it, and you've got a small Y-split, you've got a very functional chin slider, and you've got these nice small svelte ear hooks that terminate in, oh, I just love these small little 2-pin connectors. And this is the type of 2-pin connector. Look, the connection here on the Blue 2 is slightly recessed, but this is the type of connector that works really well on an IM that is recessed. It works really well on one that's not recessed. It's just the perfect solution. And I don't know, just about the perfect cable. So I like to see that here on this IEM. Of course, that will lead us into talking about the earpieces themselves. And before I talk about fit and comfort, we'll just do a little bit of a tour of these things. Aesthetically, I do think these are slightly improved over the original blue. And I'll pull in the original. So this is the original Zero over here on the right, and on the left, it just has a little bit better sense of depth to it, but generally a pretty similar motif, right? It's blue, of course, but you've got this interesting textured pattern that's underneath kind of a layer of gloss lacquer. And yeah, I don't know. I think it's pulled off a little bit better here. Apart from that, though, the shell is basically the same. You know, you have a plastic shell. It does have a bit of a lightweight, kind of cheapish feeling to it, but this is not an expensive IEM at just 65 bucks. So that much can be forgiven. But the one real big change to the form factor here has been, and Crinacle will tell you about this, they made the nozzle a little bit smaller. So the nozzle on the original Zero Blue was kind of notorious for being quite wide. And I guess I'll pull this up for comparisons. So we've got the original over here on the right and the new nozzle on the left. It might not look like a big difference, but it is noticeably smaller here on the new model. In fact, let me pull out my calipers. We can measure it and show you exactly how much smaller. I believe it's supposed to be about 6.2 millimeters. And on my calipers, I'm actually... hold on, let's get it. Yeah, I'm getting about 6.1 millimeters. So yeah, it is definitely a little bit smaller. And here's what I'll say. I did not really personally have a big issue with the nozzle width on the original one. And so here with this one, as you can imagine, don't have an issue with it. The only main difference I really kind of noticed is that using a smaller nozzle actually meant that I was going up a size in ear tips, just because in terms of how much space is being taken up inside my ear, there's a little bit more room now. And because of that, I use a larger ear tip. But other than that, comfort-wise, fit-wise, this fits a lot like the original Zero, which I guess is my cue to throw this thing in my ear and show you exactly what it looks like. So one thing you might also be noticing is I'm using foam ear tips on this thing. Here's a pro tip. If you're wearing foam ear tips, I generally don't prefer foam ear tips, but here's actually why, because it takes a little bit of finagling. What you want to do is kind of compress the ear tip so it sits like that, drop it into your ear, kind of hold it in place, and then the foam will kind of expand and fit into the ear canal quite well. Now, the bonus of this is that it's nice and secure, gets you a nice stable fit, and you get actually pretty decent isolation out of a foam ear tip. The downside is just that it takes a little bit longer to fit because of that. But once I've got it in my ear, yeah, generally I would say that this is a decent fitting IEM. Again, to note, some people have had issues with the nozzle on the previous one. I didn't really have significant issues with the nozzle on either the original Zero or the Zero Red. And as you would expect, this one being a little bit smaller, I still don't really have issues with the nozzle on this guy. And generally I would say that it fits actually a little bit more stably than your average dynamic driver IEM, even though it doesn't have like any semi-custom molding or anything like that. Like, it's a very generic universal shell design. It's just the way that it kind of drops into the contra bowl here. Actually works pretty well for me. Again, it doesn't fit super deep. Like, it's not the most comfortable IEM, but generally pretty happy with the fit of the Zero shell in general. Okay, anything else to talk about? Let me just scroll through my notes. I don't think so. So we can roadie wrap this thing back together and start talking about the sound here on the Zero Blue 2. And as you might imagine, we're going to jump over to Squiglink for this. So this is the frequency response that I've got of the Zero Blue 2. If you want to take a look at this for yourself, of course, I've got it on Squiglink, linked in the description down below. Check it out. You can pull up a bunch of other IEMs and compare it with this one. But one thing that might be a little bit different from my normal presentations here is that I've got the Harman target as the highlighted target here. And because, well, the IEM is very much going for the Harman target, which you can very, very clearly see here on the frequency response graph. So we do have a pretty significantly boosted bass. In fact, this is a little bit bassier than your average Harman tuned IEM, which then kind of dips down in the lower mid-range. This gives it like this sense of contrast in the lower mids. This is basically the way that Harman target is able to give you a lot of bass, which people like, without it sounding muddy or thick or boomy. And I think that the Zero Blue 2 does that. Like, it delivers on quite a bit of bass while still giving you that contrasty mid-range that keeps it nice and clean and I don't know, transparent and bright sounding. And then the other aspect of the Harman target that you can see is very much hit here on the Zero Blue 2 is this lower treble emphasis. So you can see versus my neutral target, which is the lighter gray line, I think this sounds neutral to me. So when you have the added treble of the Harman target up here, it ends up sounding a little bit bright, a little bit contrasty. And again, kind of like this feature plus this feature plus the boosted bass, like all of these features combined are basically what the Harman target is. And again, you can see this is a little bit of a play on the Harman target, and then it's got a little bit extra bass on there. And then also I would say that this upper treble here is excessive, not just for my own taste, but also for the Harman target. But mostly, yeah, I would say that this is going for a Harman target tune. So what does it sound like subjectively to my ear? Well, frankly, it sounds pretty V, all right? That contrasty sound signature, a lot of bass, a lot of treble, not a whole lot of mids, ends up sounding pretty V. But it does it in a way that's like fairly tasteful versus like, I don't know. Again, you can definitely have a bass boost that ends up being kind of bloaty and smeary and really like puts the mid-range underwater. That's not really the presentation that you get here on the Zero Blue 2. Instead, you get something that's just kind of contrasty, and it gives you like a good sense of separation between sounds, but it does also just kind of give the mids a little bit of a sterile, kind of lifeless character to them, which if you're not after the mids, might be a good thing. The treble, however, I would say on this guy is kind of messy. It comes across pretty forward, and I don't think it's just that lower treble emphasis, which is pretty typical for the Harman target. I suspect it has something to do with that upper treble zing that we saw there in the frequency response, but overall, yeah, it does come across pretty kind of like brittle almost in the treble, a little bit sharp, and frankly pretty fatiguing. And I would say that's honestly like kind of a big issue for me with the Zero Blue 2. Now, this is the issue that I alluded to at the top of this review. I mentioned this IM has, in my opinion, a problem, and there's two different ways that you can solve it that are included in the box. And one of those ways that you can solve it is with the foam ear tips, okay? Like I mentioned, I don't usually prefer foam ear tips, but nonetheless, here with the Zero Blue 2, I do think that this is the better sounding version of the Blue 2. Here, it does tame down the treble a little bit. You still get that contrasty sound. You still get that bass emphasis. And I think either with the foam tips or without the foam tips, a nice improvement on this versus the original Zero is it just adds like an extra bit of definition. I think that the attack and the sharpness is a little bit better on this IM. But by using the foam ear tips, you can kind of tame down that upper treble excitedness. And it still gives you, again, a contrasty sound, but it just does it without, I guess, so much of the fatigue. Yeah. The other solution, though, if you don't want to go to the foam tip solution, is actually this guy. I mentioned it comes with an impedance adapter, and that by adding this to the cable, you will change the sound signature of the IEM. How exactly does it do it? Well, let me pull up Squiggly again just to kind of highlight for you these differences that we're talking about. I guess for starters, if you want to take a look, and if you're curious to see how you do this for yourself, basically just scroll down here to where you see the Zero Blue 2 highlighted. You can see that I've got it with the silicone ear tips in this measurement, and then you can click over here to see what changes with the foam. And that's where you see, you know, some improvements in the treble smoothness. It really does help it quite a bit. But the other potential option you had is that impedance adapter. And for this one, I'm gonna highlight both graphs at the same time, so you can see how big of a difference this guy is making. All right. Basically, with the impedance adapter, not only do you have a little bit less of this lower mid-range, kind of upper mid-range, lower treble region, you have a lot more thickness down here in the bass. And it's not just like a sub-bass boost. It is a tilt that starts at around 1 kilohertz. So this entirely really warms up the sound signature. You can see that rather than going for kind of like this Harman target lower mid-range, you almost get this new meta lower mid-range tilt, just with gobs and gobs of bass. Now, here's what I'm going to say about this. With the impedance adapter, I don't like it. It's too much bass. And that's just with 5 ohms of impedance. It's interesting if you want to add even more bass, a 10 ohm adapter is going to make it way over the top. And then your average like 25, 30, 100 ohm impedance adapter is going to make this sound really super, super underwater. Again, I don't like it, but if you're going for gobs of bass, maybe you'll have some fun with that kind of thing. So I don't know, for me, the preferred solution was definitely to go with the foam ear tips. Yeah. So I guess just to continue on like my sound impressions of this thing with the foam ear tips, it does bring down the fatigue levels and it does still have kind of a contrasty V-shaped sound signature. I think that separation and definition are generally pretty good on this thing. Again, you get that nice bass emphasis while not necessarily sacrificing on the definition and the separation between sounds. So that is kind of the good aspect of this IM, but the downside is just that it's not really a mid-range vocal focus set. And if that's what you're after, well, I don't think the Zero Blue 2 is going to be your cup of tea. However, there are a couple of other IMs that might be more your cup of tea, so we'll bring those in for comparison, including the Zero Red. So this was the follow-up to the original Zero. There's the Zero Red, and now we're on the Blue 2. This one was intentionally tuned to the Harman target, which like even Crinacle will tell you is like not his favorite sound signature. The Zero Red was tuned much more toward his preferred sound signature. And I think overall the Zero Red is the more balanced sound of the two. It's just less contrasty, less V-shaped, and while you still get that bass emphasis, you still get that nice kind of clean mid-range presentation. It just does it without kind of like the over-aggressive sharp treble. And overall, I still prefer the sound here on the Zero Red. Now, that doesn't mean that it's entirely an upgrade to the Zero Red, because there is one aspect of this that I think that the Blue 2 actually does a better job of, and that's just like that definition and that sense of resolution. I think that the Red kind of comes across a little bit soft sounding, a little bit blurry and fuzzy sounding, whereas here on the Blue 2, you definitely do get a sharper sense of definition on those transients. You're going to get more of a sense of detail in the sound signature, but it comes at the expense of the mid-range just sounding contrasting, a little bit unnatural, whereas the Red, I think, is the better balanced set. But that's not the only other IM in this price range that you've got to choose from. In fact, this one is actually a little bit cheaper. I think price on this is now probably around 50, 55 bucks, but I don't know, things keep changing, so who knows? But this is the Moondrop Lan. And frankly, this is still like my favorite budget dynamic driver IM. This one, it's just a single dynamic driver, so it doesn't have any of this like sub-bass emphasis that you're getting out of, you're not getting this like subwoofer effect that you're getting out of these two Zero IMs. But this one just kind of gives you like a nice, neutral, clean sound signature that's still got really nice bass to it, but it's not going to have nearly as much bass to it. Now, the plus side is that I think that this gives me like a balanced sound signature, kind of like the Zero Red, but it does it without sounding, low res and a little blurry. Like, I wouldn't say that this thing is like incredibly high resolution or anything like that. Again, we are talking about a budget dynamic driver IM, but definitely versus the Zero Red, I think this thing sounds more textured, more detailed. And then versus the Blue 2, maybe it doesn't sound quite as like contrasty and open sounding. Like, I think the imaging performance is probably going to stand out to you more on the Zero Blue 2, but I do think that the balance here for me, for my tastes, is definitely better hit by the Lan. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's frankly going to do it for my thoughts here on the Zero Blue 2. Let me just consult my notes, make sure I'm not missing anything. But I'm not. Yeah, I don't. Out of 5 stars, this one's a little rough for me. I'm going to give it 3 stars out of 5. Look, I think the treble is really kind of annoying on this guy, but you can solve it in a couple of ways. For me, the foam ear tips is the best way to solve it, but I don't really like wearing an IM with foam ear tips. And even then, I would say it still ends up a little bit contrasty, a little bit V-shaped for my preferences. So this is definitely, in my opinion, the way to enjoy the Zero Blue 2, but if you're just shopping in this price range, I feel like the Zero Red is a better option, and especially the Moondrop Lan. But of course, if you want to check this IM out, of course, I've got it linked in the description down below. While you're down there, if you haven't already, please do think about hitting the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, join me on Discord, also linked down below. And I'll catch you in the next super review. Cheers.
Join with the force of reviews. We now have the tools to brave the misleading world of audio fools. Hey, this review are you? Grab your headphones, sniff a graph, and share your thoughts in this pursuit. Let's get into the future.